A crazy serial killer who has killed 17 people actually claims to be the true God who saves the world. It turns out, he used these 17 people as materials for human experiments. Some of the dead were drained of all their blood and made into mummies, others were dismembered and frozen in refrigerators. But the killer claimed that after 17 experiments, he had successfully developed a miracle drug that could cure any disease.
17명을 죽였지만 대신 세상을 살렸으니 결국 죽은 사람은 0. 사람들을 구하기 위해서 어쩔 수 없이 희생시킨 건데 이건 대체 언제 물어보시려고요?
Recently, a series of bizarre missing persons cases had happened in Gyeon, South Korea. It had been confirmed that more than 10 people were missing, and the police had said that these may not be simple disappearances. Another person was targeted that night. Caught off guard, he was quickly knocked unconscious on the ground. When the man regained consciousness, he found himself tied to a cold operating table, with his blood being slowly drawn out through a tube, dripping into blood bags beside him. By then, he was completely unable to resist. Finally, he could only die a tragic death at the killer's hands. The continuous disappearances plunged the whole city into panic. The police had to deploy the highest level of investigative resources. Following the few available clues, they finally tracked down and identified the target. On this day, a SWAT team led a raid on the basement of an abandoned factory. Prosecutor Cha Yi-eun, in charge of the case, also arrived at the arrest scene.
경찰이다! 움직이지 마! 움직이지 마!
반갑습니다. 차이연 검사님.
The killer, Lee Woo-cheon, wasn't flustered at all, as if he had long expected the police and Cha Yi-eun to come. He even told the police to wait for him for 5 more minutes, saying there was still a patient on the bed receiving treatment. But the police wouldn't fall for such a stalling tactic, so they arrested him on the spot, along with all the tools he used to commit the crimes. But before Lee Woo-cheon was taken away by the police, not only was he not flustered, but he repeatedly warned the police not to let anyone else operate on the patient in his place.
내가 하던 수술 방식이랑 뒤엉키면 다시는 회복 못할 거예요.
After saying these inexplicable words, Lee Woo-cheon was taken away by the police. Afterwards, Cha Yi-eun took a few steps forward, and was surprised to find the person on the bed was still alive. But then the police found a large number of dismembered and preserved human remains in the nearby refrigerator. On the other side, lawyer Park Han-jun once again secured the release of his client. Park Han-jun was a recognized ace defense attorney in the legal world. He was very capable and had never lost a single case, and this time, his client was indeed guilty. But to earn money, Park Han-jun had to win this acquittal, because his daughter suffered from a terminal illness called Batten disease. It's a rare genetic degenerative neurological disorder, which causes patients to lose their eyesight, and suffer from cognitive and motor degeneration, and the disease is incurable. Existing treatments can only alleviate the symptoms, so his daughter must stay in the hospital for treatment. But the huge medical bills weighed on him like a mountain, so between justice and survival, he could only choose the latter. A few days ago, a friend said he could help him find a treatment for Batten disease.
희귀유전병 치료제다 보니 입찰 비용이 비싼 건 아시죠?
제가 어떻게든 만들어 보겠습니다.
It turned out the drug had just completed clinical trials and wasn't yet officially on the market, so it was simply unavailable on the market. But if he invested in the initial project, his friend could get the medicine as soon as possible. So Park Han-jun needed to raise the funds quickly. Afterwards, he began asking various friends for money, but very few were actually willing to lend. The situation quickly reached a dead end. Meanwhile, after Lee Woo-cheon was taken to the police station, Cha Yi-eun volunteered to interrogate the serial killer.
전 어떻게 알고 있었던 거예요?
예전에 기사에서 본 적이 있어요. 제가 기억력이 좀 좋거든요.
In Cha Yi-eun's view, the evidence at the scene was irrefutable. Even if Lee Woo-cheon had superpowers, he couldn't deny it. But Lee Woo-cheon didn't admit to killing anyone, claiming the body parts in the fridge were for his research. He also argued vehemently that he wasn't killing people, but was focused on developing a cure for terminal illnesses, just like the man on the bed. When he was caught was a terminal cancer patient. When he came to him, the cancer had already spread throughout his body. Only his medicine could cure him. Then Lee Woo-cheon said bluntly that to develop a specific medicine, he had to conduct live experiments. Upon hearing this, Cha Yi-eun immediately pressed whether the victims were killed by the experimental drugs, or killed first by Lee Woo-cheon and then used for experiments. But Lee Woo-cheon suddenly froze. After thinking for a long time, He said it was different each time, depending on the situation. Seeing Cha Yi-eun continue to press for the number of victims, Lee Woo-cheon's expression clearly became agitated. He questioned if Cha Yi-eun wasn't interested in the treatment he had developed at all. Cha Yi-eun ignored him, took out the DNA test results, and said the body of one victim hadn't been found. Cha Yi-eun asked Lee Woo-cheon where the body parts of this victim were, but Lee Woo-cheon teased Cha Yi-eun for being too aggressive, showing no sign of pleading guilty. Watching Cha Yi-eun get completely enraged, Lee Woo-cheon picked up a pen and wrote the equation 17-17 on the paper.
17명을 죽였지만 대신 3성을 살렸으니 결국 죽은 사람은 0.
Afterwards, the police followed Lee Woo-cheon's confession, rushed to the disposal site he mentioned and began digging. Finally, 7 complete bodies were unearthed. Once the story broke, it exploded across the internet, making headlines in all major Korean news outlets. Public opinion was instantly in an uproar. Some condemned Lee Woo-cheon's cruelty, while others couldn't help but wonder if what he said made sense. While the incident was causing a huge stir, a reporter surnamed Zhao took the initiative to contact Park Han-jun. They met in a cafe. They were old acquaintances.
제풀이 사건 잘 봤습니다. 유명한 PD잖아요. 아니 나는
Reporter Zhao never expected Park Han-jun to take this case. To this, Park Han-jun could only whisper that he was doing it to support his wife and daughter. Upon hearing this, reporter Zhao immediately asked if Park Han-jun wanted to do a job that could support his family with him. This was the main reason. Reporter Zhao had asked Park Han-jun out today. As he spoke, reporter Zhao handed the tablet to Park Han-jun. It displayed the news report about Lee Woo-cheon. It turned out reporter Zhao was delivering a request on Lee Woo-cheon's behalf. Lee Woo-cheon had specifically chosen Park Han-jun as his defense attorney. Besides, the retainer Lee Woo-cheon offered was terrifyingly high, so exaggerated that it had 9 zeros at the end, a number ordinary people wouldn't even dare to imagine.
요즘에는 유명한 로펌에다 변호 맡기는 게 나보다 훨씬 더 유리하지.
이우겸이 꼭 변호사님이어야 하는 이유가 있답니다. 문세국이라고 한 변호사님이 아실 거라던데.
Park Han-jun's face immediately turned serious upon hearing this, because Moon Se-guk was the friend he had contacted earlier, but after receiving the money he had raised, Moon had completely disappeared. Hearing that Lee Woo-cheon knew Moon Se-guk, Park Han-jun hurriedly asked how he had met Moon, only to receive a shocking piece of news. Moon Se-guk was actually one of the victims in Lee Woo-cheon's case. To find out what was going on, Park Han-jun asked reporter Zhao to arrange a meeting with Lee Woo-cheon for him as soon as possible. Before long, the two met Lee Woo-cheon at the detention center.
문세국을 죽였어?
예, 죽였어요. 왜요?
In truth, what Park Han-jun cared about most was neither the details of the murder case itself, nor whether Lee Woo-cheon was truly innocent, but the drug in Moon Se-guk's hands that was said to cure Batten disease. So he immediately asked Lee Woo-cheon what he had done with the drug in Moon's possession, but Lee Woo-cheon said he had no idea about any treatment drug. He had only killed Se-guk, and then asked Park Han-jun why he was in such a hurry, guessing someone in his family had a terminal illness. The little daughter you finally had, right?
아이, 생각보다 순진하시네. 이러니까 20억을 뜯기죠.
It turned out there was no miracle drug at all. They were all lies Moon Se-guk had used to scam money. Presumably, the defense fee Lee Woo-cheon offered was the inheritance left by Moon, the same money Park Han-jun had been scammed out of. Afterwards, Lee Woo-cheon went on to say that Batten disease was completely incurable. According to previous cases, someone like Min Se-oh would have at most 5 years left. But now there was an exception. He could cure Park Han-jun's daughter, Min Se-oh. It was clear Lee Woo-cheon knew everything about Park Han-jun's family situation. At first, Park Han-jun didn't believe his lies, thinking it was just a ploy to get away with murder. Lee Woo-cheon wasn't angry. He calmly told Park Han-jun to go see the patients he had cured, saying that once he saw them with his own eyes, he would naturally believe him. Then Lee Woo-cheon promised to give Park Han-jun a 1 billion won deposit first, and another 1 billion won once he won the case. Unexpectedly, as soon as Park Han-jun left the prison, he actually received 1 billion won. He hurriedly asked reporter Zhao when he had met Lee Woo-cheon. Reporter Zhao thought carefully and said, it was about a week before Lee Woo-cheon's arrest. At that time, Lee Woo-cheon had approached him, saying he had cured 6 terminally ill patients, and that reporter Zhao would get paid if he was willing to see it for himself. Reporter Zhao thought the job was easy and profitable, so he took it without hesitation, planning to write a special report after seeing the patients' conditions firsthand. Upon hearing this, Park Han-jun immediately told reporter Zhao to take him to see the cured patients. He was desperate to know if what Li Wuqian said was true. Meanwhile, the police hadn't yet found all the victims' bodies, and the National Forensic Service had detected the same substance in the victims, which was very similar to a new drug recently developed in the U.S. Li Wuqian had actually used this drug before the U.S. Then Detective Jason added a few more pieces of information. Li Wuqian was a top student in medical school, but after a car accident, he seemed like a completely different person. He had been in a vegetative state for 3 years, during which time, his mother, whom he had depended on, also passed away. This might be the reason for his drastic personality change. Afterwards, Xia Yiyan discovered that all of Li Wuqian's victims were ex-convicts. Xia Yiyan went to interrogate Li Wuqian again, but regarding the whereabouts of the remaining victims, Li Wuqian remained tight-lipped.
피해자들이 전부 전과자였다는 게 아니라
아이, 너무 유치하다.
Li Wuqian emphasized that sacrificing a few lives to save many was only natural, but Xia Yiyan's attitude was firm. Even if Li Wuqian saved hundreds or thousands of people, if he intentionally killed even one person, he was a murderer. Upon hearing this, Li Wuqian suddenly lost interest. He just wanted to end the interrogation quickly, but Xia Yiyan immediately declared, even if Li Wuqian refused to reveal the other disposal sites, she had enough evidence to prosecute him. After leaving the prison, Xia Yiyan immediately contacted Jason that they must find the remaining disposal sites as soon as possible, by any means necessary, so the police immediately expanded the search area, and went door to door asking local residents for clues, but after working for a long time, they found nothing in the end. The case hit another dead end. At the same time, Park Hanjun and reporter Zhao began searching for the cured patients. They learned from the family of the cancer patient that Li Wuqian had cured a polio patient named Changwu, a disease that was theoretically incurable. Upon learning that Changwu's mother was acquainted with the owner of a hair salon, the two quickly drove there. Park Hanjun wanted to get Young A's contact information from the owner, but the owner didn't have her number either, so she only took out a painting done by Changwu. Park Hanjun and the reporter found a similar location based on the scene in the painting, but after searching, they still found nothing. Just as the two were at a loss, the owner suddenly called, saying she knew where Changwu's mother lived. The two quickly drove there. The moment they saw Changwu walking towards his mother, Park Hanjun was stunned. He had thoroughly investigated Changwu before, that Changwu would probably spend his whole life in a wheelchair. But the Changwu in front of them couldn't only walk normally, but even run and jump, no different from an ordinary child. After confirming the boy was indeed Changwu, Park Hanjun immediately went to the prison to see Li Wuqian. Although Changwu standing again was indeed a miracle, Park Hanjun couldn't believe Li Wuqian had cured him based on his word alone. On the contrary, Li Wuqian looked approving and said it was right to be skeptical. Only then would one want to see the truth clearly.
원래 사람들은 죽었다가 살아날 때 눈에 보이는 것보다 깨닫는 게 많아요.
Then Li Wuqian began to talk about his own experience. He had been in a coma for 3 years, due to a car accident. In truth, Li Wuqian didn't know how he had woken up. His attending doctor said it was because his blood had mutated, but afterwards, the aftereffects of the accident left him in constant, agonizing pain. The hospital was completely helpless, until Li Wuqian cured himself with a self-developed miracle drug. And this drug could cure not only his condition, but also other diseases. Naturally, Batten disease was also within its scope of treatment. Although Park Hanjun still had his doubts, this was his only chance to save his daughter. He had to cling to Li Wuqian as his last hope. On the other side, Xia Yiyan hadn't given up. She was still desperately gathering all kinds of clues about Li Wuqian. This exhausted her subordinates. Her subordinates were full of confusion. Xia Yiyan was clearly the youngest daughter of a chaebol family, able to live a comfortable life. Why bother to push herself so hard? But Xia Yiyan had her own persistence and stubbornness. But soon, Xia Yiyan received a crucial piece of news. Park Hanjun was actually going to be Li Wuqian's defense attorney. She immediately went to the minister and applied to be in charge of the prosecution against Li Wuqian. The minister disagreed at first. He planned to assign it to a more senior prosecutor.
변호인이 박한준인데도요?
뭐?
Upon hearing this, the minister immediately sat up straight. Park Hanjun was no ordinary man. He was from the Central Investigation Department and very capable. He had won the country's first landmark cases on illegal labor and workplace bullying. Xia Yiyan told the minister bluntly that any other prosecutor would lose against Park Hanjun, but if she won this case, the minister would also gain countless benefits. After a moment of hesitation, the minister finally agreed to her request. When she returned to her office, her subordinate immediately handed over Li Wuqian's polygraph data. No matter how many polygraph examiners were changed, or how many test modes were switched, the conclusion was always the same, that Lee Wucheon wasn't lying. Shortly after, the minister called Cha Yi-yun, because the bodies of all the victims hadn't been found. For a long time, the police station and higher authorities were under increasing pressure. The minister told Cha Yi-yun to find out where the bodies were hidden as soon as possible, even if it meant offering a suitable bargain to Lee Wucheon. Cha Yi-yun had no choice but to agree. After all, she knew Lee Wucheon's previous request was for her to listen to him talk about his miracle drug. So when she met Lee Wucheon again, Cha Yi-yun changed her interrogation strategy and stopped pressing for the disposal sites. Instead, she asked Lee Wucheon to talk about the miracle drug. Only then did Lee Wucheon show an excited expression, saying the starting point for the drug's development was a rotting flower pot. At first, he had just poured the leftover experimental solution into the flower pot, but when he woke up the next day, he found the long wilted flower had miraculously come back to life. Then he dropped the solution into a fish tank, and the dying goldfish inside quickly came back to life. Afterwards, Lee Wucheon conducted numerous animal tests. Unexpectedly, all of them were a great success.
이쯤 되면 검사님도 궁금하지 않으신가요? 사람한테도 통하는지.
So he began human experiments. The experiment was a complete success with the 17th person, and that sacrificial test subject was Hong Jae-gwang. Lee Wucheon added that when Cha Yi-yun met Hong Jae-gwang, she would be shocked by his masterpiece. Besides this, Lee Wucheon also voluntarily said that he had long planned to turn himself in after curing the last patient, because in his view, only by being publicly recognized in court would his research be truly officially certified, and all his crimes would be forgiven by the world. After saying this, Lee Wucheon gave the specific locations of the body dumps, but he specifically emphasized that he wasn't doing this for a reduced sentence, but to make a deal with Cha Yi-yun. He hoped Cha Yi-yun would help him demonstrate the actual effectiveness of the miracle drug in court. But Cha Yi-yun immediately rejected this request. After leaving the interrogation room, Cha Yi-yun took her team straight to the address Lee Wucheon had given. They searched for 4 hours before finally finding the body. It was actually a mummy. Clearly, all the blood had been drained from the body. As soon as she returned to the prosecutor's office, Cha Yi-yun immediately called an emergency meeting. When the high-ranking officials learned that Lee Wucheon had voluntarily revealed the body dump locations, they asked if he was trying to get a reduced sentence, but Cha Yi-yun lied, saying that was exactly what Lee Wucheon wanted. She also said she would apply to the judge for the death penalty for Lee Wucheon. 3 days later, the trial officially began. Cha Yi-yun went straight to the core from the start. Since Lee Wucheon claimed that 17 people died in experiments to create a treatment drug, then he should present complete research records to support the claim of medical research. Park Han-jun immediately stood up to refute that they had already submitted the relevant research records, but Cha Yi-yun immediately pulled up photos of the victims being brutally dismembered, and sharply retorted that, if the purpose was truly only medical research, why dismember the victims' bodies into pieces? If it was just a normal experiment, why was Hong Jae-gwang's whole body drained of blood?
가 운전하던 차에 교통사고를 당했고요. 교통사고를 낸 가해자에게 분노와 복수심이 생겼을 겁니다.
조경찬 씨?
It was clear Lee Wucheon wasn't a researcher at all, but a serial killer who slaughtered others to satisfy his own perverse pleasure. With that, Cha Yi-yun also submitted the complete records of the car accident from that year. But at this point, Lee Wucheon suddenly let out an inexplicable laugh. This untimely laughter enraged the victims' families in the audience to the extreme. Sensing the situation was bad, Park Han-jun immediately stood up to begin his defense. He didn't deny any of the prosecution's charges. Instead, he bluntly said that the prosecution's claims were reasonable. But all this was because Cha Yi-yun hadn't yet met the patients Lee Wucheon had cured. Therefore, he wanted to summon the 6 terminally ill patients cured by Lee Wucheon to testify in court. But after the trial, Lee Wucheon learned that Park Han-jun hadn't invited anyone at all. It had just been a quick thinking tactic.
하체를 그렇게까지 훼손한 이유가 뭐냐?
개구리 입으로 왜 이렇게 잔인하게 합니까? 이 질문이랑 똑같은 거라고요.
The reason Hong Jae-gwang's blood was drained was because the experiment on him was a complete success. His blood was the key experimental sample, and Lee Wucheon was absolutely certain that as long as the drug he developed was truly effective, the truth would prove everything in time. He shouldn't be convicted of any crime at all, and to find a glimmer of hope for his daughter, whose condition was worsening, Park Han-jun had to gamble everything. He tried to contact the patients who had been treated by Lee Wucheon, hoping they would testify in court. to give Li Wuqian a chance to turn the tables, but standing up for a convicted serial killer required not only immense courage but also a heavy price.
살인자로부터 치료받았다고 하면 사람들이 뭐라 생각하겠어요?
In the end, the two recovered patients he could contact,
A polio patient and a terminal leukemia patient, both refused to testify in court. Park Han-joon had to go to
the prison again, asking Li Wuqian if he had contact information for the other 4 patients, such as a patient also suffering from Batten disease, but he said he didn't have the patient's contact information, but there was a red notebook in his study, which documented the whole process of all his research. But the notebook was probably taken by the police long ago. That night, Park Han-joon rushed to the basement of the abandoned factory. To search for evidence, he found the treatment files in Li Wuqian's filing cabinet. Just then, Park Han-joon spotted a sneaky man. He immediately gave chase and finally caught him, and took him to the police station. The man wasn't a criminal, just a video blogger looking for clout. The next day, Cha Yi-eun took the initiative, having the police go to Park Han-joon's office, trying to take the relevant materials with a search warrant. At the critical moment, Park Han-joon rushed back to the office in time. He slammed his business card on the table with the materials, saying it was his desk, firmly saying that the police could take materials from anywhere else, otherwise, he would sue everyone present for theft, successfully defusing Cha Yi-eun's attack. That night, Park Han-joon and reporter Zhao went out for a drink. During the conversation, reporter Zhao learned that Cha Yi-eun had been Park Han-joon's student at the training institute, and the smartest and most stubborn student he had ever taught. Just then, lawyerman
Young, called by reporter Zhao, arrived for the meeting. Min Young and Park Han-joon had worked at the same law firm. Hearing
they were worried about the witnesses, Min Young offered to help. She was best at communication, and was willing to try to persuade the patients. With Min Young's persistence, Park Han-joon had to agree to let her help. Before long, the 2 patients finally relented and agreed to appear in court. But what really swayed them wasn't Min Young's persuasion, but a letter sent from prison, written by Li Wuqian.
But Park Han-joon didn't want Li Wuqian to force the witnesses to come forward in
this almost coercive way, so he sternly warned Li Wuqian that all future actions related to the trial must be approved by him. He mustn't act on his own again. Although Li Wuqian looked reluctant, he nodded in agreement. On the day of the second trial, Changwoo's mother took the witness stand as promised. She told everyone that it was the drug developed by Li Wuqian that cured her son's polio, allowing a child who had never stood since birth to now live like a normal person. Again, this testimony caused a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the courtroom. Whispers also arose in the gallery, but Cha Yi-eun immediately proposed another medical possibility. The symptoms of polio are very similar to those of another neurological disorder, Sagawa syndrome. There are precedents of misdiagnosis in clinical practice. Perhaps the original hospital diagnosis was wrong in the first place, and Sagawa syndrome already has a well-established specific treatment, so the claim of curing the patient with a new drug completely loses its basis. Then Cha Yi-eun called a doctor specializing in such diseases to testify in court. The situation was instantly pulled back to square one when it was Park Han-joon's turn to call Tae-jin, the terminal leukemia witness. The agreed-upon person failed to show up, just as everyone thought the witness was too scared to come. Cha Yi-eun spotted Tae-jin hiding in the corner of the courtroom, immediately having him brought to the stand for questioning. Faced with Cha Yi-eun's questions, Tae-jin admitted he had indeed received treatment from Li Wuqian, but his leukemia had recently relapsed, and Tae-jin specifically emphasized that Li Wuqian had threatened him in various ways to testify in court. Upon hearing this, Park Han-joon's heart sank instantly. After the trial, Park Han-joon quickly caught up with Tae-jin. Why would a beneficiary who had clearly been treated by Li Wuqian refuse to tell the truth?
그게 사실이니까요. 저 다시 안 좋아지고 있다고요.
The sudden turncoat witness made the already difficult defense even more arduous, and Li Wuqian clearly showed dissatisfaction with Park Han-joon's progress during this time. He bluntly said that if this dragged on, the situation would only become more and more unfavorable to him. If the case couldn't be reversed in the end, he wouldn't be able to help Park Han-joon's daughter with her Batten disease. But Park Han-joon immediately retorted, if Li Wuqian was truly kind-hearted, how could he have sent threatening letters to the witnesses?
너 솔직하게 말해봐. 너를 증명하고 싶은 이유가 뭐야?
감당 가능하시겠어요?
On the other side, Cha Yi-eun took the initiative to find Tae-jin, patiently asking about his physical condition and the various details of his past treatment by Li Wuqian. But Tae-jin said that perhaps before long, Changwoo would follow in his footsteps. But Cha Yi-eun knew full well that Changwoo showed no signs of relapse. But then Tae-jin said that a while ago, worried, he had gone back to the hospital for regular treatment, only to relapse shortly after. Upon hearing this, Cha Yi-eun suddenly remembered something Lee Woo-cheon had said before, that if the cancer patient went to the hospital for treatment, mixed with Lee Woo-cheon's surgical method, he would never recover for the rest of his life. Could this be the reason for Tae-jin's relapse? That's all for the first 2 episodes of Bloody Flower. This drama is adapted from the novel of the same name by writer Lee Dong-gun. Judging from the released plot and the production company's information, it basically follows the novel's setting. The subsequent plot will be even more exciting and full of ethical impact and tragedy. To find out what happens next, please stay tuned for future commentary updates. If you like my channel, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe.